Well, we are very excited because right now in this session, we're going to do something we've never done before. How many of you ever gone on the internet and watched a TED Talk? Okay. Very good. A few of you have. Well, if you have never seen a TED Talk, TED Talks the TED Talk conferences are so exclusive that for the main conference, not only do you have to have a special sort of secret invitation to get to attend, but I think the registration fee is somewhere like $15,000 to attend the conference. So you are getting such a bargain today. But the TED Talks, the idea is to take about 15 minutes maximum, somewhere right in that range, and have somebody present an idea, a thought, something that would provoke you to think differently in some way, and then have an opportunity to reflect on that and then go on to another topic. And so as Philip and I were working and others were working on the conference, Philip said, I want to do something like that at Winter Conference. And so we started to work on that. And then he called one day and he said, and you know what? I want them to be MOE Talks. I said, MOE Talks. Okay, what's a MOE Talk? What is that? And he goes, Mission, Outreach, and Evangelism. I was like, that is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So we are going to do, for the first time ever, some MOE Talks. And just so you know what's coming and the way this is going to go, we've got 3 different individuals who are going to get up and share on a topic that relates in one way or another to mission, outreach, and evangelism. And after each one of them is finished, we're going to have a little bit of music, sort of not sort of worship, but sort of reflection time, so that you can just sort of meditate and think, and we can allow what we've just heard to kind of sink in a little bit deeper. And then the next person will come up and we'll have a little bit more music, and then the next person will come up. So that's kind of the order for things and what's happening. So when the first person walks off and you just sort of hear some music, you'll know what that's about. It's just an opportunity to sit and reflect. And as we've been reminded so beautifully this morning in Brian's word, it's just a natural time for us to talk with our Father. Amen? Amen. Well, the 3 people we're going to hear from this morning, one is Leslie Kingman, and we want to give a special thanks to Leslie because one of our speakers, because of some illness issues, was not able to attend at the last minute, and so Leslie volunteered and raised her hand with very little notice, and so we're so thankful for Leslie and that. She's from San Antonio, Texas. Then we're going to hear from Don Blair from Little Rock, Arkansas, and then Daniel Lizarga from San Antonio as well. So with that said, Leslie, we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Good morning. Loving Lamar is really a how God works story. 3 years ago, Grace, our community of believers, felt God calling us to an empty building in an area of town just south of us. You guys are church planners. You know how this works. We entered into negotiations and hoping that the buyer would give us, basically, the building or rent it to us for $1. He didn't. But we negotiated that for a really long time, several months, where we worked on that and prayed about that. And as part of that, we started prayer walking the neighborhood and looking at ways that God calling us to this building? Was God calling us to this neighborhood? Well, come to find out, God was calling us to the neighborhood, not the building. But God, in his amazing way, took us on this journey of trying to get this space so that we would be part of the community surrounding the space. We knocked on the door of Lamar, a local elementary school that's in the neighborhood. Lamar has a 95% free and reduced lunch. The children at that school, 95% of them are part of Texas free and reduced lunch program. So we met the counselor and we asked her how we could help. The school, because of the aforementioned 95% free and reduced lunch statistic, did not have a functioning PTA. So all the things that PTAs do were not being done. So we wondered if we could come alongside this school and do some of those things. And as we visited with the counselor, who was also, that's also another God thing, she was absolutely the right person at the right time, in the right place. We decided together that it would bless the children and their families if we hosted a fall festival at Halloween. So we put together a fun evening on Halloween 2011, and over 300 kids and adults showed up. Now an annual event, this Halloween, 650 kids and adults showed up for an evening and happiness of fun with us. We followed that up in December of the same year with a Christmas blessing project. You probably do this or have done it in the past, where families were adopted by our Grace families to provide Christmas gifts. We delivered the gifts to the school. The counselor allowed the families to come pick them up so it didn't embarrass or humiliate the families. This blessing project also continues each December at Grace. It's all good stuff, right? Yeah. It was my historical definition of what it means for the church to serve. That was what service needed to look like to make sure we could check the box when it came to community outreach. Strong, high impact, isolated events. We came in our big white Chevy Suburbans. This is Texas. So we came in Chevy Suburbans everywhere. We dispense goodness and mercy, and we go back home. So in January 2012, we're pretty much patting ourselves on the back. We have pulled off 2 major blessing projects in less than 2 months. We're feeling pretty good about ourselves. And we come to Winter Conference 2013 right here in Houston. And Reggie McNeil, one of the plenary speakers that year, set us straight. His description of what we were doing, some of you were here, you may remember it, throwing the turkey over the wall and running. Reggie challenged us to be church, to be a blessing to communities on an ongoing basis, to find ways to demonstrate the love of Christ, not by creating a structure or coming together on Sundays or organizing isolated outreach events, but by being out there showing others what the love of Christ looks like, feels like, is, day in and day out, to radically love. One of the examples he used was a weekend backpack program, which provided snacks for food insecure children to take home on Fridays to get them through the weekend. So we came back to Lamar and asked, would a program like this help you? 95% free and reduced lunch. What do you think they said? Yes. After reviewing several options as far as programs that would work to be of service to Lamar and allow Grace Fellowship to shoulder the bulk of work involved in an ongoing basis, we decided to partner with a program out of Amarillo, Texas, called Snack Packs for Kids. This program gave us a lot of flexibility. We could, for example, send food home to younger children who were not yet school age if we wanted to, with their siblings. We could include peanut butter and crackers once a month. It just gave us a lot of flexibility that other programs didn't seem to offer. And it forced us to do the bulk of the work and to be on the school campus every week. So in September 2012, we began serving food insecure children at Lamar. The children are identified by the counselor or the teachers. We don't have anything to do with that. That's obviously not our expertise. So, but the children are identified by the school. We just provide the food. Once a month, an order of food funded by Grace, but at a reduced cost, thanks to a partnership with Labatt Foods, is delivered to Lamar. One evening a month, a group of mainly men meet at the school, box cutters in hand, to stock, basically opening boxes and plastic packaging so each item can be individually packed. Another evening a month, another group meets to pack 4 or 5 weeks of snack pack sacks for the children covered by the program. Every Friday, teams of people show up to include a piece of fresh fruit in each snack pack. That fruit is donated by our local grocer, H-E-B, and to deliver the bags to the classrooms where teachers discreetly place the bags in the appropriate children's backpacks. Every Sunday at our services, we accept jars of peanut butter from our community to be included in snack packs. Although our leadership comes primarily from grace and our funding comes from grace, it is interesting that our volunteers come from a variety of places where perhaps 1 or 2 grace folks are the catalyst. Places like Bible studies, workplaces, neighbors, friends, acquaintances. It is amazing to see how God brings people together to love others. I get a lot of questions about what is included in each snack pack. Well, for one thing, every single item has to be able to be opened and eaten by a 4-year-old child without adult supervision. Remember the children that we're serving. So basically, we try to load up on protein and on calories, honestly. Beef sticks, they're a kid favorite. I think they're awful, but the kids adore them. We have found a Chef Boyardee little pop-up thing. I also think those are awful, but the kids adore them. Sunflower seeds, cheese, and peanut butter crackers, breakfast bars, cereal, fruit, also make the list. We survey our children each year to find out what is their favorite and least favorite item in the packs. And milk, even though it's expensive, comes in dead last every year. What do you do about that? You want these kids to get calcium and protein. So this year we are giving the kids chocolate milk, and we're hoping that will tempt them to actually partake of the milk that we're giving them, and we're hoping it's going to move up on the list so that milk is not dead bottom this year. A year ago, we began to wonder what to do about summer. Clearly, food insecure children continue to have food issues in June, July, and August. Last year, in a family Christmas card that my family received, a friend included a large check to use at Lamar. Is that God? Yeah, because she doesn't attend Grace, and I had never spoken to her about the need for a summer program. Anyway, we were able to launch a summer program this past summer. The Loving Lamar price tag as part of Grace's budget is a big piece of the pie. But here is how we have seen God work with our investment. God provides. 70 to 80 food insecure children are less hungry on the weekends, and because of that, they are able to come to school Monday mornings ready to learn. Attendance is way up at Lamar, especially on Mondays and Fridays. And in the first year of our snack pack program, Lamar rose from 167th to 8th in overall performance of all San Antonio Independent School District schools. God creates relationships. We've been hearing about that this whole conference. Because of our approach to simply demonstrate Christ's love, we have earned the respect of both the administration and the teachers. They now see us as partners in helping serve children, not as that church trying to evangelize. Now we are, of course, laying groundwork for fulfilling the Great Commission, but it is a slow, steady process of demonstrating the love of Christ over and over and over again. We are confident that relationship and trust will eventually open the doors to sharing the gospel. It's already beginning to happen in small ways. God impacts. Our volunteers are A, amazed when they discover Grace fits the bill for the food. B, they seem genuinely appreciative that there is an opportunity to serve alongside us. And our evening work times always conclude in prayer for the children, the school, the teachers, the families, the food, whatever God lays on our hearts. How amazing is it to be on a public school campus in Texas in 2014, praying out loud for God's blessing for Lamar. God grows. The program has now been started primarily by other churches in 2 additional schools, and we are talking to another large church about taking on a whole school district over the coming year. Grace has provided some startup money for one of those situations, but we have been patient and intentional about allowing God to touch other people and other churches to come forward to lead. God heals. Interestingly, one of the churches who just took a school is the Episcopal church that we left 3.5 years ago, most of us. God again, healing, forming bridges. What an amazing byproduct. God embraces. In the last 6 months, Grace has experienced an influx of young single 20-somethings. Most of these kids have been part of our nighttime volunteer group at Lamar. When they decided they wanted a faith community, Grace was there, already in relationship with them. Has it stretched us as a community of believers? Certainly it stretches us financially as we continue to commit the financial resources required to run the Loving Lamar program. God has created a situation where we have to show up. It has forced us into ongoing, everyday outreach. And not just the 4 or 5 people in our midst who have a heart and a giftedness for mission. Not just those people, but all of us, from the busy mom who grabs an extra jar of peanut butter when she's at the grocery store shopping, to those who volunteer once a month, to those who lead, to the brownie troop who this year in their selling of Girl Scout cookies is asking everyone who buys a box to buy an extra box for the snack packs at Lamar. To those who pray for us, we are all participating in protecting the humanity of others, of sheltering them from the humiliation and the degradations of life. God has created for us an incredible ease of implementation. He made our negotiations with the school district and the school easy. He opened doors with HEB and Labatt Foods for us to find partners who understood food insecurity and wanted to be involved. He has provided exactly the right hands and with exactly the right amount of time to get every job done. This happened yesterday during, all of a sudden, we in the San Antonio group realized that we might have a snow day today. And our food goes home on Friday. And I was amazed that our volunteers started calling the coordinator to say, how are we going to get this food to these kids? Look at that. The volunteers have ownership of these children, of making sure that they get what they need. We got all the snack packs out yesterday, and it's a good thing because all San Antonio is closed today. So God did that one too. One of the required reading pieces I always provide when I talk to other churches about Loving Lamar is a blog article that a friend of mine sent me very early in this process. It's by Richard Beck, and it's called Accompaniment and the Ministry of Presence. Normally, I make those I'm speaking to read it before we even start into discussion, but this format didn't really allow for that. So there are going to be copies of it. It's on a rocket red piece of paper. It's one sheet. And they'll be there at the exits when y'all leave. Please grab one, and please put it somewhere where you will read it. Not once, but over and over again. Every time I read it, it encourages me. Finally, let me return to our logo for a moment. Loving Lamar. It doesn't say anywhere on it, thanks to the generosity of Grace Fellowship SA. Nor does it say, brought to you with love by Grace Fellowship SA. It doesn't have our name anywhere on it. So who is loving Lamar? You know the answer. God. God is loving Lamar. I want you to be prepared and kind of be on your guard, because our story is confirmation that God releases vision at Winter Conference. In the Loving Lamar logo, we are just the pencil. God's mighty hand is doing the writing. I rejoice ahead of time for kingdom stories God will write as a result of this year's messages. Who does he want to love through you? As our apostolic vicar says, be strong, be courageous. God will be with you as he writes a story that spreads the kingdom in your city. May you be blessed as Grace has been blessed by the privilege to demonstrate God's radical love. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Don Blair. I'm the Ministry of Recovery at St. Andrew's Church in Little Rock. I've got to tell you this, that for 25 years I overserved myself with alcohol. So I want to tell you about first coming to St. Andrews. I had a good buddy who had a friend in St. Andrews, a girl, Sylvia Brady, a good friend of mine now. But I told him I was going to start going to St. Andrews. So he called Sylvia and said, Don Blair's going to start coming to St. Andrews. And she said, oh, great. Said, what does he look like? She said, well, he said, well, he looks like a truck driver that just got out of prison. So Sunday morning I showed up in the parking lot and started walking toward the door, and Sylvia came out and said, you're Don Blair. Anyway, I was greeted at St. Andrews and was loved, and they accepted me. I loved that. And I saw right away that they had a heart for the lost. And anyway, a little later, Stephen Saul was kind of starting some small groups. So we were supposed to go to our table that Sunday morning, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday table, Thursday, Friday table, and stand at a table and let about 5 people sign up. And then you backed away and somebody else stood up there. So Don and I, she had agreed for us to be a facilitator to begin with. So Don and I cheated. We knew 5 alcoholics, so we just wrote their names down and backed off. So we started out with 5 alcoholics at a small group in our house, and studied a little old book by John Stott, and it was just amazing how God showed up with that. Holy Spirit showed up. We immediately went to 8, and then we had 10 and 12 real fast. We were baptizing people in the Spirit in my living room. We brought a guy to Christ out in the front yard, and next thing you know, there's 15. And so it was just, we had a little bitty house. We asked and got permission. We needed to move to the church. So we did. And we were asked, I think Philip Jones asked us to do a alpha course and not invite anyone from the church. So we got these 15 or so people to all bring somebody. Y'all just got to bring somebody. So sure enough, we had 30, 35 people that went through that alpha course. And it was very successful. So we started feeding these people, you know. Many volunteers in our church started helping cook, and we'd feed them a meal, have praise and worship, and if you could call it that. And then we'd talk, not necessarily the 12 steps, but we would preach into the 12 steps. I mean, the Bible is full of recovery stories, and you could just use that as a recovery book, and we'd talk about a step, but we'd preach about the scripture, that kind of. So we started trying to grow this thing. So we started running around in Little Rock with a band. And now we've got 4. But we started going to the VA, the Veterans Administration, and picking up van loads of vets. And they loved that. And there'd be times that we'd be stop at a red light on Sunday morning, headed to church, and there'd be some poor soul sitting on the park bench, the bus bench. We just opened the door and said, "Hey, come on, man, let's get some coffee and donuts," and, you know, he could get on. So some of these people look pretty rough. I didn't have enough sense to know better. I always thought that all churches would be open to that, you know. So we'd get some pretty rough-looking people in there, and I'd get back in the van after service, and we'd leave, head back, and I said, "Well, how'd you like it?" He said, "I loved it." I said, "Did anybody talk to you?" And they said, "Yeah, there's people come up and talk to me." I said, "How many?" He said, "I don't know, 50. That was wonderful, you know. So to do this, that's just a point that I want to make. You're going to have to have a congregation that wants this kind of a program, and I think most everybody has a heart for the lost and the downtrodden, and so anyway, and Philip would come and invite them to church. He said, "This is your church. Come on Sundays. Come like you are. Bring what you got. Come and believe later. Just come." And they did. And at one point in time, I don't know how it is right now, but at one point in time, it made up about 10% of our congregation in the morning. A lot of veterans, a lot of poor people, a lot of alcoholics. We started going to these treatment centers, picking up a van load of alcoholics that were in treatment, and went to several, 3 or 4 treatment centers, and we still do, and we still go to the VA. And we had some great success. I've got some success stories here about some of the women. Now, there was one treatment center we went to that was, it was for pregnant, addicted mothers with kids. and we started picking them up, and it'd be one woman, 4 kids, or so we had loads of people come there, lots of kids. We had to have a huge nursery and people to help these older, different age kids. And I just want to tell you about this one lady, Evelyn, who was a prostitute. She had 2 little kids, a little boy about that big. And we'd try to get him to a Sunday school class or a nursery class. I mean, he would spit and kick and bite. I mean, just a pitiful little boy. Well, he's 12, I think now, or 13. He's on the honor roll at school, and he reads for us on Sunday morning. So this is not only helping people that are alcoholics, it's preventing alcoholics. It's preventing that alcoholism. These are wonderful kids. And several stories like that. We gave Evelyn a 9-year coin about 2 weeks ago. So I was asked, H. Miller here the other day, a couple of weeks ago, he was in Little Rock, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he said, most of these kind of programs are on the outer edges of a church. How is it that gig is dead center in St. Andrews? So that's really what I'm trying to talk about. That's my talk. Churches are going to have to, or need to, accept these people. And it's beautiful. I mean, at the rail, I mean, we've got a millionaire, a federal judge, and a bum, and a bum. And when they kneel down, they got a hole in the bottom of their shoes. And it's just like heaven. I mean, somebody said, that looks like heaven. So our congregation is very, very accepting of that ministry. And it's, I think it, excuse me, those lights are putting my eyes out. If we can get people involved in that, if you can find a spirit-filled drunk that is willing to do this, what we do. When I say we, I'm talking about my wife and I, but I don't mean we. When I say we or I, I'm really talking about God. God jumped on this from the very, very beginning. I mean, right out of the box. And I know one year I baptized 80 people. And probably in the course of this 8 or 10 years, I've probably baptized 500 or 600 people. Now, AA will tell you 1 in 35 maybe will get sober. I don't accept that. I mean, we're getting a lot of people sober. And their higher power is Jesus Christ. And I mean, it's not some doorknob, or, I mean, I mean, it's Jesus Christ, and we let them know that. And we tell them that on the front end. The higher power here is Jesus Christ. And I'm telling you, these people are coming to Christ in big numbers, and they're being baptized in big numbers. And now many of them we don't see. I mean, some of the same ones that were coming to gig live in Little Rock, so they drive themselves back now. They're coming and become a part of our church. They're members of our church. They volunteer at our church. They're greeters. They're ushers. They help in every way. I mean, these are ex-drunks that are really involved in our church. Some of them have been there so long that the people that are going there now don't even realize, well, those were gig people, 8 years ago. They don't realize that they came through gig. And so we really don't really know how many people there are from gig because they've been there so long. They just like everybody else. I don't know. Let me think just a second here. I've got two scriptures that burn in my heart, and one of them is, what we do unto the least of these, we do unto God. And I think that needs to be a pretty important point in any church. And Isaiah 58 is the perfect fast of breaking the chains that bind, breaking the yokes, feed the hungry, house the poor. That's in my heart. I mean, that's just what I've always done. That's the way I've always been. Even in AA, I was helping people. You know, I just helped people, and I felt for people. And Bishop Barnum, Thad Barnum, talks about, and he preaches about it, and he always tears up. And he says, if you're preaching to Christians, may God have mercy on your soul. We must be preaching to the lost. I mean, that's the whole point of this. That's what we're all supposed to be doing. And I don't know if he meant you can't preach to Christians. I just mean that you need to be preaching to the poor and the lost and the least of these, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. And Philip loved that program. Robert Cook loves that program. It is so moving. The Lord's got such a grip on that. Don and I don't do anything. I mean, we just show up and buy groceries on Monday and put them together on Tuesday and cook on Wednesday and have a great praise and worship. It's very unorthodox. I mean, I've apologized. There have been pastors come there before and said, I'd go apologize. I'm sorry about the roughness of this thing. And, you know, Brian would be playing music in cutoffs and flip-flops. And we started our first praise and worship back early on, and y'all flagged me down or something here. We didn't have praise and worship, so I knew that anybody that's ever been in prison could play a guitar. And there's one guy who'd been locked up for 56 years, and he could play a harmonica. So we put together this little band that did praise and worship, and it was really cute because we just had prisoners that could do something, you know. So it's been a very successful program, and my whole point is to maybe put a thought in some church's mind, some pastor's heart, that that's something that could be done. And it's not like some of the Celebrate Recovery. I'm not talking bad about them, but you can't just take a program and go hand it to some deacon at your church and say, you run this program. I mean, I think you need somebody that's experienced alcohol and drugs and that loves the Lord dearly and has a heart for the lost. And that's my whole story for tonight. And I've got some brochures back on the table as you leave the door that will give you a bigger, better picture of this. And I hope I've covered everything that I wanted to. But anyway, my time's up. And so, out of respect for our next speaker, we're fixing to end this. And God bless all of you.
I want to apologize in advance that I have a script, but I want to model cultural sensitivity here. And when you have 15 minutes Anglo time, to put a Latino up here with the Holy Spirit coming around, that's tricky. So I want to show that it can be done. I come from El Paso, which for my fellow Texans is in Texas, not in New Mexico, or Mexico for that matter, but it is on the border. And that perspective has helped to shape who I am, what I do, and how I do it. And one of those experiences, because being on the border up until recently with all the difficulties, the problems that have been going on with drugs and violence and so forth, there is that constant going back and forth. And the identity of one who is there can be either that of ni de aquí, ni de allá, not even from here, nor from there, or it can be from both, ambos. So the integrated part is that of both for me. And how that comes into play into my faith life is a very important part. Having grown up there, and one of the experiences going there with my family to eat and then shopping a lot of times, this is a number of years ago, people selling, if you've been to Mexico, you know that there's a lot of handicrafts and so forth that are being sold. And my aunt, I was with my aunt at the time, and she was very interested in these bags that this lady was selling. And the lady was very kind and very just conversational and showing us the bags. And there were these kind of knit bags that she had that beautifully done. And so my aunt said, well, you know, how much was it? And of course, usually you start getting into a bartering or rather bargaining here in terms of how much and reducing the price. But what she said was very low already. And so my aunt said, well, you know, how many do you have there? And she said, well, I have 6 left here. And so my aunt said, well, I'll take them. And she said, you can have, you know, I'll sell you some of them, but I need some of them. And she said, but I'll even think she went the other way and started bargaining up. And she said, well, I'll give you, you know, a little more for them. And she said, well, no, I can't sell you that because that's all I have left to sell. And she said, my aunt said, and? She said, well, then what would I have left to sell? So hearing this conversation, and even though I'm of Latino ethnicity, I've been raised in a system where that kind of thinking, that kind of simple logic is not a part of the system that we grew up in. Doesn't make economic sense, does it? When you don't want to sell the product that you're selling. But this woman was making a bigger statement, I think. And what I tried to do is to get her perspective on this, because it was her identity, it was her dignity that she was about and that she was standing for. And that I was only able to understand that if I entered into her understanding, her perspective, her life. I tell this because in some ways, I believe it's the potential for us as the mission to consider, or perhaps in some ways to reconsider who we are and who we want to become. You see, the lady brought to me something that I didn't have, but I had to be open to understanding. And once I saw that, I had a deeper appreciation, not only for her, but for what the Lord was doing and speaking to me through her. It was an appreciation more for my identity, not only in terms of who I thought I was, but what that culture really was deeply embedded in it, those values of dignity, of respect. And so she did something for me much more than I ever could have done, or that my aunt could have done by buying the bags that she was selling. So I come here today to share some thoughts about the Latino culture and about the mission. I want to, first of all, if it's going to be something credible, I have to show you some numbers. You see, because I've never been to a conversation, a lecture, or a talk when we talk about Hispanics or Latinos where you have to look at numbers and, no, back down. And those, that arrow especially, isn't that impressive, you see? Because we love numbers. We love to look at the increase in numbers and how that speaks to us. So we're looking at this on a national scale in the United States. As of today, or as of, I should say, December 31st, 2013, that number is 53.4 million. And over 1/3 of those are under the age of 18. And furthermore, if you want to look at the other end of it, only 5.6 are age 60 and over. Okay? That's impressive, right? But can we look beyond the numbers? Can we look at the faces that we see serving here in this hotel? The faces that we encounter in schools, the faces and people that we see in different settings in our cities. Yes, not just in San Antonio, not just in Houston, not just in El Paso, but I assume Chattanooga. I know in Atlanta. I know in DC, where I lived for a number of years. So it's not just here. This is growing. And for some people that can be intimidating, overwhelming, scary. I wonder sometimes if whoever came up with the term Hispanic thought of it as his panic. And that's why I say Latino, because that sounds so much better than Hispanic. But I'm not here to come as a marketing strategist that looks at those numbers and sees the buying potential of, I don't know, a couple of $1 trillion now. I'm not here as a political consultant who says, yes, we have to get this vote, this constituency. I'm not here as someone who's looking at bottom line in terms of who it is we have to go after, or as a church consultant saying, we got to get those numbers in our group. I'm here as a brother in Christ, as a fellow, a co-laborer in the vineyard of the Lord, as one who is asking that we not look merely at numbers, but at people for who they are and who they can help us to be. You see, because the approach is that we have to do something for them. And when we look at the Great Commission as Christians, it's our understanding. We know the command is there. Jesus said, go forth and baptize. And that's what we're about as the mission, isn't it? That's what we're doing. That's our focus. We are going forth. But with that Great Commission, that command from our Lord, also comes a beautiful invitation. A beautiful invitation to be transformed, not on our own, not just by what we do, but how we do it and who we do it with. It's an invitation to open our eyes and see things from a different perspective, to look at not just what we see, but what's there. Not just numbers, people, fellow sinners, fellow Christians, fellow saints who are with us in this together. And so, for me, that invitation is a challenge for us to do things, to look at things differently, in a different way. And that's why the year 1991 should be a very important date. If you don't have this written down, write it down. Think about what you were doing in 1991. And let me show you if you can remember this. Remember that? I know some of the guys here were getting excited thinking it was a piece of Blazing Saddles movie that was going to come out. See, they know what I'm talking about. Ladies, you can ask later. 1991 was the year that salsa surpassed, the sales of salsa surpassed those of ketchup as the primary condiment in the United States. Do you think part of the reason might be because, well, there were more Mexicans who had an appreciation, of course, part of the culture. Well, I'll tell you what, we wouldn't buy paste picante sauce. We make our own. That means that you all were buying it. The Anglo community in the United States started saying, this isn't just ketchup. It's got something to it. Let's buy it, and we'll pay $4 a jar to buy it, especially if it's not made in New York City, right? And so that year, I think, is one that is important to us because we can see how we are open when we are open to something that gives spice, gives life, changes things up a little bit, if you will, for our taste buds, can make a difference. And now, I don't even know, I didn't look up the numbers of what they are, but darn, I wish I would have made an investment in paste picante sauce back then. So the same applies to us and to our work. If we're open and we can see how things can be spiced up a little bit, maybe there's a different way. Maybe it enhances what we do. Maybe it gives us a different way of looking. It's an invitation, and we can choose to make that. But it is a challenge, no doubt. What do we have to do to get there? How do we do it? Etc. are the questions that probably come to mind. But those shouldn't be the only questions. That invitation extends itself for us to be able to live in our own realities where we are. And that invitation is one that we can choose to accept and to move forward with it. But again, it requires an openness and a perspective. And I, at this point, don't want to disagree with mi vicario apostolico, who gave you a brief lesson on Texas history yesterday. But there is another side to that story. But I'm going to be sensitive to my script here. And the next winter gathering, maybe we'll have it in San Antonio, where you can taste paste picante, and we can go to the Alamo and chat about what happened. So, are you with me here? What I'm saying here is, if we can be open, if we can look at things differently and not just see things as the bottom line, we can not just get after it because we have to, but we can be transformed in that process if we open ourselves. So I think that having the Latino presence is one that I hope can be seen not as Hispanic, but as His blessing upon this place, this society in some way. And I want to show you some of the areas I've identified here as where that blessing, pieces of that blessing can be. And so the first is with family, which is very important. Thank you. Which is a very important part of life as a Latino. The connection, the bond that, if you will, that we have as members of family is very strong and very important. And it also ties in with what community is all about, and that's something that we in the mission foster intentionally and see as something that is life-giving and strong. And so with the Latino presence, we can look at what that entails in terms of relationship, you see, because we have relationships everywhere. We have compadres. You see, I don't say the godfather, the godparents of my children. I call them co-parent co-father, co-mother of my child. That's a relationship that I have. We have a word for if you're an in-law, the in-laws of the other spouse are your consuegros. They're with in-laws. We're related. I say, mi vicario apostólico. He's not él, I mean, he can be, but my connection with him is mi capitán, you've heard that, mi general. We're always looking for ways to relate, to connect, and even in our language, that's reflected. And as family, we invite and welcome everyone. My oldest sister's wedding, the first wedding in our family, 200 invitations were sent out, and only 500 people showed up. Somehow, we were cousins with people that I had never seen or met, and that's common, or it's not uncommon, I should say. Hospitality. And I think some of you who may have traveled in Latin America and Mexico may have experienced this. A sense of welcoming that is genuine, that is authentic, that is really, when you say, mi casa es su casa, really means it. There's a love, there's a sacrifice there that one takes pleasure in doing to make someone feel like royalty, to make someone feel at home, like it is your house. And it is, because you can stay there for as long as you want and be treated that way. And I think we try to model that in our own Christian communities here. But I think also we can look at going beyond that into our society, you see. And I think that our African brothers and sisters and Asian brothers and sisters also have a lot to say about this. My own family, my brother is married to a Filipina, and for me, that hospitality that they share with everyone is just a beautiful model of how those cultures together complement each other. I do have a fantasy that one day, when the first Latino president is elected, and she may be here somewhere, we might see this at the customs sector at the airport. And maybe our African brothers and sisters who come to Winter Conference will see this from the very beginning and feel at home in this place. So there's a lot, I think, that we can offer to that. I also want to say that in Hebrews 13, we read about the entertaining angels, right? And I think that that's very much a part of how this ministry of entertaining angels that the Lord sends to us is. And I would be remiss if I did not point out right now, in this context, the issue of immigration. I'm not speaking to it about as a political issue, and I know there's a diversity of opinions out there. But are we called as Christians to look at things differently, to be able to share, to welcome, to embrace, to call brothers and sisters regardless of where you come from? We have dreams. We all have dreams for our children, for our children's children, to be happy, to be healthy, to be better. It's not just a thing that's here in the U.S. with citizens officially. We all share that dream. I want to talk about blessing, because blessing is such a strong foundation of what we do, of what we celebrate. Some of you may be familiar with the tradition of the quinceañera, when a young lady turns 15, which has its roots in the royal courts of a coming out of party, but has also become an opportunity for blessing of this woman to be, that the community, it's a communal act. And it's not uncommon these days, unfortunately, that it's just about a party, spending extravagant amounts like the proms and all that we see, the extravagance that is present today. But if we go back to what it's about blessing. And blessings aren't just big events in our lives. They're everyday acts. I bless my children every morning, trace the sign of the cross on their forehead and say, may the blood of Jesus protect you. My mom did that with me. And so I want that tradition to carry on. Before leaving, we respect our elders and ask for their blessing. We love blessings. We bless statues, we bless houses, we bless cars, we bless everything, but we need to bless ourselves because ain't nobody else going to do it. My daughter, by the way, I won't say which one, got back at me one time when she was about 3 or 4. I have 4 daughters, so I won't say. But she said, bladder Jesus protect you. So I always talked about the heart of Jesus, now I knew about the bladder of Jesus. I want to talk about the accompaniment, acompañamiento, when you are with someone, acompañar, see, to be with someone. We see this in the story of the walk to Emmaus, companionship. That's a deep part of our culture to be. A year and a half ago, my mother was on her deathbed for several months. People would come to the house and just sit. She was in the other room. They would be sitting for hours sometimes, not saying anything, just being there. When you talk about accompaniment and presence, I think Leslie mentioned that in her talk, that's part of who we are and what we do. And that's something that we can help to foster in this mission as well. And part of that accompaniment is the suffering, is it not, as I just alluded to. Because suffering, you see, for Latinos is not something you try to get over and done away with, and that's it. Suffering is a virtue. Suffering is a blessing. Why? Because it connects us, you see. And so that's why the suffering Jesus that you see on the crosses in Latin America, in churches, they're born, beaten, just flesh. Because that's what's happening in our lives too. And we feel Jesus accompanying us. And during Lent and those other opportunities, we accompany Jesus, the suffering Jesus. And before we can see any other resurrected face of Jesus, we have to know, kiss, love, and embrace the suffering face of Jesus. Memoria histórica. This is the historic memory, is the literal translation. But what it is that the past is never the past. The past is with us, and where we go, what we do, shapes us, and we know that. We recognize that presence in our lives as a community, especially where we came from. Because that is, again, who we are in our identity. And we have something in that in the mission, the ancient future church, right, that connects us with that. And what's interesting to me is when we talk about memory in that context, about the Last Supper, of which we celebrate together, it's about remembering. Do this for the remembrance of me, Jesus tells us. Remember. Comes from the Latin word mens, which means mind. Remind ourselves. In Spanish, that same word is recordar. Cor means heart, comes from heart. We re-heart with Jesus in that moment, in that event. That moment, that life is our life through our heart. And finally, last but not least, fiesta. How we celebrate, and we love to celebrate. Even in the midst of suffering, in the midst of everything else, there is this part of us that celebrates, you see, that wants to share that celebration. In San Antonio, many of you know that we have a week-long festivities for an entire week, and this year actually it's going to go to 2 weeks in April, called Fiesta. We love that part, and we love to share that with others. And I'm not just talking about the San Antonio events, but in general, we know how to party. So, as I said, with the Great Commission comes that wonderful and beautiful invitation. The change of perspective invites us to be transformed if we allow it. And we can, and we will. And so I just want to show you, when you spice things up a little, what that can look like. An icon of our Anglo heritage, or perhaps Teutonic, to be exact, will demonstrate for you. If you'd like to stand up at any point here and meditate, I invite you to.
Well, has that helped you think differently about a few things?